Hello, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, faculty, and students, a very warm welcome to each of you to this virtual event, which promises to be an intellectually enriching experience. Today, we are honored to have with us a luminary in the field of economics, Dr. V. Anantha Nageshwaran. I am Shubham Singh, and I am delighted to be your host for this special occasion. Before we dive into the hearts of today's events, let's take a moment to acknowledge the significance of today's gathering. We are here to gain insights from a seasoned economics, chief economic advisor to the Government of India, and a distinguished figure in the field of finance. As we continue to our journey through this event, may I request our director, Father S. George, to welcome our distinguished guest.
Thank you. Dear students, esteemed faculty, and honored guests, it's with great pleasure I welcome all of you to today's online guest lecture featuring an eminent economist and influential thought leader, Dr. V. Anantha Nageshwaran. This virtual session. Dr. Nageshwaran's vast experience, ranging from his role as to his distinguished career in global finance, offers us a unique perspective on economic trends and policies. With a background that includes key positions at institutions like Bank Julius Baer, Credit Suisse, and Union Bank of Switzerland, Dr. Nageshwaran possesses a deep understanding of global financial markets. His contribution to education and public policy, evidenced by co-founding the Takshashila Institution, reflect a commitment to shaping sustainable and inclusive economic growth. As we embark on this online lecture, we look forward to gain valuable insights from Dr. Nageshwaran's wealth of knowledge. I once again extend a warm welcome to our esteemed guest, Dr. V. Anantha Nageshwaran, for what promises to be a thought-provoking and engaging session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Now, without further delay, let's welcome Dr. V. Anantha Nageshwaran for his address. Please put your hands together and welcome our guests.
Good afternoon, everybody. Are you able to see me and hear me well?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Sir.
My sincere thanks to the director for his welcome remarks and to students for inviting me to share my thoughts with them. I will share screen now so that you people can see the PowerPoint. Are you all able to see the PowerPoint well? Okay, so without much further ado, let me go into the theme of my presentation. The theme of my presentation today is to help you, make you understand the dimensions of public policy, which are more nuanced than what we all, since I'm a management student myself, having graduated from IIM Ahmedabad in 1985. And now, after having spent 2 decades in the private sector, now having, and then a brief stint of 15 months as a dean of the IFMR Business School down south near Chennai. And then now for the last 2 years, almost 2 years now, in the current role as Chief Economic Advisor, I have had the good fortune of marrying my management degree, my PhD research discipline, private sector experience, and bring them all together into the public policy role that I have taken up in the last 2 years. So it is those insights that I want to share. First, I am going to, since it is an afternoon session and most of you have had your lunch and probably assemble here, it might be a bit difficult to stay awake, especially given that the speaker is not physically present, and the temptation to keep checking your personal screens will be very high. So I'm going to ask you to make you stay awake by asking you a couple of questions at the beginning, and I hope you can answer them. In all low-income countries across the world today, how many girls finish primary school? Any answers? Have you all muted your lines, or can somebody speak? I don't hear anything.
Sir, people are saying it's around 20 to 40%.
Okay. The correct answer is 60%. Next question. Consider the average Indian who works a minimum wage job. In 1960, he or she would have had to work 7 hours to afford approximately 5 kilograms of wheat for her meal. How long does she have to work today for the same quantity of wheat? What is the answer?
About 2 to 5 hours.
5 hours?
About
The
2
answer
to
is
5 hours.
the answer is 50 minutes. And that is a very clear sign of progress.
And red is like somebody has to be like Snow White to carry that on.
अच्छा वैसा रेड है क्यों वीडियो
Hello? Hello? I'm hearing other voices. So could you, if you're not speaking, answering the question, please mute yourself. Thank you. And then next question. Between 2005 and 2005-6 and 2019-21, how many people were lifted out of poverty in India? The answer is 415 million people, or roughly 30% of the population, came out of multidimensional poverty. This is a Niti Aayog study, and it is based on a methodology that the UNDP had come out with. Okay? So the point of showing all these 3 slides is to show you that in general, negative news has great salience. For example, recurrent heat waves caused by climate change in urgent need of redressal. Look at the headlines. India's heat wave deaths in June, a harbinger of worse to come. World Earth Day, temperature rising in Europe, 15,700 deaths due to heat wave. Intensifying heat waves prompt health warnings for Europe and the US. California's Death Valley crosses 53 degrees Celsius, blistering heat wave continues. The truth is, according to a Lancet study, cold deaths are 9 times more than heat-related deaths. And the same thing in India as well. Both moderate cold and extreme cold kill nearly 6 lakhs per year compared to moderate heat and extreme heat. So when you consume news without context, so what happens is, due to global warming, the number of cold-related deaths will actually come down far more than number of heat-related deaths that will go up. The developed world is actually making us focus on global warming much more. And related to that, they want us to focus on carbon emission mitigation. Now, they reach today's developed world status by burning carbon, by emitting more carbon. By making us focus on reducing emissions, we have to give up on cheap and affordable energy. And therefore, we will end up sacrificing economic growth. And students of economics, or even students of management in your first year courses, you would have understood that economic growth is a prerequisite for generating domestic savings, which in turn goes into investing for tackling climate change and global warming, apart from other infrastructure-related needs. So we need growth, even if we have to address global warming. But the focus on climate change, global warming, and targeting emissions does not serve our purposes, and in fact, does not serve even the West and its obsession with emission reduction. It is therefore an important lesson in this is that the world has to consider trade-offs. Are we focusing on the right problem? Are we understanding the trade-offs? And are we prioritizing rightly? I will come to that a bit later. That is the lesson from these set of slides. Next, the world, in fact, has not only gotten better, but also exceeded initially assumed estimates in many ways. The world we live in today is not perfect, but our natural tendency is to focus on the negative. Not easy to be truly objective. We need to be mindful of and acknowledge the staggering level of progress made across issues in the world. This should be easy in theory, right? For example, look at the number of airports India has. India had 74 airports in between 1947 and 2014. This number of domestic airports has doubled in the last 9 years. 74 has become 148. Why is it that the human being always not satisfied? First of all, that is a good basis on which to make continuous progress. So in that sense, it is positive. But the other reason why we are never satisfied is that every time one of our previous goals gets fulfilled, our level of aspiration also rises. That is why no amount of progress seems adequate, because we forget. Like, for example, when you get into an unreserved train compartment, you are very happy if you simply get a foot into the door. And then the moment you get inside the compartment, you are looking for a place to stand comfortably. And then next, you want to get a seat to sit comfortably. After you get a seat, then you want to actually get a berth if possible. So every time a felt need is satisfied, unfulfilled need actually increases. And therefore, the gap between reality and the unfulfilled to binary thinking, extremes, but the real world operates in the middle, in the gray zone. Nothing exists in between these two groups except a void, according to this framing of issues as black or white, or right or wrong, etc. And those of you who have read Jonathan Haidt and many other cognitive psychology literature would know that humans do not deploy reason to arrive at conclusions. Humans deploy reason to validate their priors, which are formed on the basis of personal experience, anecdotal but powerful narratives, what your peer group tells you, because of herding, social pressure, because of what you read last, because of the opinions voiced by elites and experts whom you respect. So in other words, We don't deploy reason to arrive at conclusions and start with hypotheses. We actually start with conclusions and look for reasons that will make us believe that we are right. And framing has such an important effect. For example, look at this particular tweet of all journalists. There's nothing wrong in saying that women journalists, all journalists should not be killed in their while they perform their work. The point is, of all journalists killed in women, 11% were women. In 2020, they were 6%. It might well be the case, for example, the number of women journalists may have gone down. But the point also is that 9 out of 10 journalists killed in the course of their work happen to be men. So if you frame the issue that way, then you understand that still 9 out of 10 journalists who die in the course of their work happen to be men. And therefore, male journalists should also be spared from losing their lives while performing their duties. But this makes it sound as if the problem is more with respect to the loss of lives of women. As unfortunate as it is, the framing issue becomes that much more important in understanding and putting issues in perspective. And also look at when we spoke about climate change and the obsession towards global warming and therefore emission reduction makes us take a look at electric vehicles as a panacea, as a solution to all the problems. But electric vehicles require electricity to be generated. And the assumption is that renewable energy is the source from which you will generate electricity. But the truth is, renewable energy is not competitive. If you take into consideration the solar PV storage, and also if you account for grid stability, you can imagine that existing compressed gas is far cheaper than renewable energy once you account for storage cost and battery, and we are not even talking about battery recycling. We are not talking about grid stability, etc. So if we are going whole hog into electric vehicles, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and four-wheelers, etc., are we actually making the environment greener and cleaner? Or are we actually generating more electricity through coal, which actually is bad? And I would also urge you to read the book, A Material World, by Ed Conway, Chief Economist for Sky Broadcasting. A Material World. This book should have gotten the first prize in the Financial Times Book of the Year 2023, but it came runner-up. Just to understand things in perspective, the amount of material we need to dig out of the earth requires energy. For example, take copper. If all countries in the world have to move towards net zero by 2050, the amount of copper we will need between now and 2050 is more than the amount of copper we have consumed since copper was discovered. And that requires energy to bring the copper out of the mines into our cars through their role in electricity generation. So we need to have a holistic perspective in order to become effective public policy makers or effective managers. And preconceived notions also stop us from looking forward and creative thinking to address challenges. Kodak completely missed digital photography. BlackBerry was a leader in smartphone, but failed to adapt to touch screens and new software ecosystems. But humans have some of these natural inbuilt biases. We cannot overcome them. We cannot become perfect, being steady at one point, becoming flexible at another point, being innovative. Then it can also mean excessive risk-taking. So most of the times we get advice based on ex post narratives. But to convert them into ex-ante behavioral formula is not easy, because the true formula is that there is no formula. No matter how flexible you are in your thinking, mistakes will occur. That is how human beings are. And therefore, in all these narratives, we miss the role of luck. If you are a believer, you will call it divine will. Or if you are a non-believer, you will call it luck. So the only two things we can talk of that are always required is the acceptance of the fact that chance and luck have played in our decisions turning into successes or failures. And second, the other thing we need to be remembering, therefore, is to be humble and not give ourselves credit for successes and blame others for failures. And that is going to be very effective if you are going to be a manager or a leader or a policy maker. Our attentions and actions are shaped by a worldwide view of issues and the information we are fed. So we should be aware what we consume, how eclectic our information sources are. If we only live in the world of Twitter or X now, or Facebook or Instagram, the real world of 8 billion people, there are only a very tiny fraction populate these spaces. Is it the reality? Or is it the reality as fed to you through social media? You must be able to make the distinction. Therefore, in reality, the world and its problems do not fit into binary categories. Problems get exacerbated in the case of the real world. Problems are complex and uncertain. Our capacity to solve problems in the real world. Given these important perspectives to keep in mind, is your training as a management student preparing you for the real world of policy making? Policy making actually is a wicked problem as opposed to an easy problem. There is a paper called Dilemmas in a General Theory of Planning that came out in 1973. And this paper is the one from which I have taken these things. Why policy making is a wicked problem. Problems are not easy to formulate. Recently, I took my officers to Hyderabad for an offsite. And I told them, let's come up with suggestions or paragraphs that should go into the budget speech of the finance minister. These are officers of Indian Economic Service who report directly to the chief economic advisor. And they have been dealing with policy issues day in and day out, development issues. But when it actually came down to putting their recommendations in specific words, into a specific sentence that can go into the actual budget speech of the finance minister as an announcement, as a clear-cut announcement, they struggle very hard. So that is why policy issues are not easy to formulate. And it is very difficult to put there is no terminal date. And things are never true or false. They either have good outcomes or bad outcomes. Road to hell is paved with good intentions. Solutions cannot be neatly listed. And there is no immediate and ultimate test of a solution because problems are not finite. Governing a country is like running a company. A company has no finite life. So does a country. There is no finite life. So it is not as if we can define everything into projects where there is a construction start date and an end date. And there are very few opportunities to learn by trial and error because consequences would have been set in motion. Sometimes it's easy to announce something. It is very difficult to roll it back. You can set something in motion, but it's difficult to pull back. And each situation is mostly unique because the context keeps changing. And one problem could be a symptom of another problem. I'll give you examples later. And choice of the explanation of the problem influences the nature of resolution. For example, crime in the streets can be explained by multiple factors. So is crime in the street a problem, or is it a symptom of another problem? Is it a problem of moral decay, permissiveness in societies? Is it because there are no employment opportunities in the economy? Is it because too much of wealth or too little in some places? Is it because of poverty that crime goes up? Or is it simply because there is less law and order machinery and laws are not adequate? Or are there too many guns? Which one of this is the explanation? There are no clear-cut rules to choose. It is trial and error. And sometimes there is no scope for trial and error. So now look at it. Given that each problem is a symptom of another problem, how do we solve this? Assume that someone chooses to explain crime in the streets by saying, okay, there is not enough police. That's the reason. Now, if we are going to increase the size of the force, but still arrests will go up, does it mean that crime has increased? Has crime in the streets increased because of the police force number having gone up? If the answer is no, then maybe without the police, the offenses would have been even higher. And in the real world, there is the impossibility of counterfactual. Some states have come up with this bizarre defund the police. And they are seeing crime going up in Oregon state. So that is a real-time experiment. Looking at the number of shops that are being looted, destroyed, and California has come up with this rule, bizarre rule in San Francisco, up to $99 you are not arrested for shoplifting. And you are seeing videos of open shoplifting. So does permissiveness actually increase crime, or does it lead to self-policing? It seems to be the case that permissiveness has actually increased crime. So in general, it is very difficult to relate cause and effect in public policy. It is trial and error. Judgment is needed. And when there is judgment needed, one has to be humble and be open-minded. These are the two rules. And this is as true of management in a corporate setting, but even truer and even more complex in the case of public policy making. I will give you another simple wicked problem to solve. And this is a classic management paper, and you might have discussed it in the class itself. A college basketball player who feeds his teammates instead of shooting will never compile impressive scoring statistics and is therefore less likely to be drafted by the pros. But the ball player who hits to the right field to advance the runners will win neither batting nor home run titles. This is in American baseball. And will be offered even smaller pay rises. It is therefore rational for players to think of themselves first and the team second. So if you create an incentive system to reward the one who scores the most, you will end up creating less teamwork, more individual effort, less uncoordinated approach, and therefore actually more losses on the field than victories. That is why this paper on the folly of rewarding A while hoping for B. So we should know what is the goal we are trying to achieve, and the incentive system we are putting in place, is it going to achieve that goal, or will it lead to unintended consequences? In socio-economic settings, except in physical problems, in matters of science, we know that there is always the case of law of unintended consequences. And that is why the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And in public policy, a very important consideration is, are we going to allow economic activity, or are we going to enforce compliance with rules and regulations? Because there will always be some small fraction of the public which would want to cheat. Is your goal to ensure that no one cheats, or is your goal to ensure that we facilitate economic activity and some will anyway cheat? These are two different mindsets. You can't maximize economic activity and minimize law breaking, rule breaking. You have to choose. Are we going to be enablers or are we going to be controllers? This situation will arise even in corporate settings as well. And therefore, when you are going to become a manager or a public policy maker, should you be a specialist or a generalist? I think in general, we have to start with being a specialist so that you know something deep before you acquire breadth. Okay? So the challenges we face today, maintaining the benefits of breadth, diversifying our experience, cultivating interdisciplinary thinking, because to become a generalist, you need to have interdisciplinary thinking. So right now, the problems are complex enough that one needs to become a deep dive expert. But over time, you need to understand that solving a problem, so acquire knowledge in a specific domain, but it is a necessary but not a sufficient condition. But you need to therefore acquire interdisciplinary thinking, which is what Professor Howard Gardner of the Harvard University talks about. The thing that will distinguish you from artificial intelligence and other human competitors is the willingness and the ability to marry multiple perspectives, which means you have to read eclectically. You have to read even those who do not necessarily conform to your priors. It is very tempting to read only those and talk to only those who are of similar mindset, hold similar views. But as long as you can disagree in agreeable ways, you need to actually seek out those whom have a different view so that you can understand that perspective and prepare yourself accordingly. Get your hands dirty with data, empirics. Ultimately, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Similarly, everything has to have a basis in data. Open to failure. Dabble in wide variety of subjects and interests. As I told you, true learning environments are characterized by absence of clear rules, fewer underlying patterns, and if any exist at all, they are harder to identify and quantify. And as I said, intelligence is multidisciplinary. And this is a toolkit that every MBA should possess. Knowledge must cross-pollinate across fields, allowing you to distance yourself from the individual segment. Because tomorrow, if you're a very successful marketing executive, and on that basis, if you are going to be made the chief executive of the entire division, your natural inclination will be to focus only on the very division that you had led before, which is marketing. You will end up over attending to marketing issues, and the new marketing division head will feel actually you are interfering with him or her. But you need to therefore put yourself in uncomfortable situations. In fact, getting itself into discomfort is a way of learning and the willingness to commit mistakes and learn from them. So just as they say, you have to celebrate conflict to be able to arrive at synthesis. Similarly, you have to embrace discomfort to be able to learn better and appreciate different environments and different contexts. This is going to be very important when we look at artificial intelligence. It is right now maybe very useful to you as students just to answer classroom assignments. You may let ChatGPT do the work for you. But it is going to have tremendous implications for your own brain growth, for employment opportunities, and as we know about the deep fake issues, it can create major cultural and social disturbances and upheavals. How are we going to decide, is it good or bad? Is all technological improvement always good? Or should some technologies be actually mothballed because the net benefits are not positive? Who judges whether net benefits are positive? Should it be left to technologists? Should public policy during COVID times have been left to health experts or public policy experts? Should immunologists and viral disease practitioners have decided what should have been the policy on lockdown? Or should lockdowns have been decided based on the cost and benefits of lost school years, other diseases not being attended to, etc.? So, in other words, policy making involves multiple trade-offs. And I think what I'm going to do is to skip the remaining slides and go straight into the problems that, in general, you have to learn to marry the general with specifics. Do not stick to the 30,000 feet worldview while examining policy issues. You have to get your hands dirty with data, ask more and more questions. One should be knowledgeable enough to be able to ask intelligent questions to start with. That is when the knowledge actually increases. Basing yourself on a couple of case studies, we cannot jump to conclusions and recommendations. Appreciate the scale and complexity of wicked public policy problems. No simple choices to be made. Don't conflate irrationality with stupidity. Very important. Because management case study problems give us the misleading impression, whether it is economics or management, we think the human beings inhabit a rational world where everything is decided on the basis of economic cost and benefits. Costs and benefits are there, but they are not just economic costs and benefits. Prestige, loss of face, emotional security, loss aversion. You and I know that loss is losing something that you're holding dear is more painful than gains foregone. Intentions matter more than actions sometimes. And humans are social animals as well. So somebody who takes decisions, not just on the basis of economic costs and benefits, is not stupid. Irrational means decisions are not based purely on reason, which is cost and benefit, economic cost and benefits. That is why when somebody is irrational, it doesn't mean that they are stupid. Be aware of this finer distinction. And lastly, if you're going to be a public policy maker rather than a manager, or if you're going to be graduating from a state of a manager into a leader, what would help you make the cut? You have to be able to inspire people. A leader inspires, a manager simply manages. A leader has to make decisions, which means you must be willing to recognize and willing to accept trade-offs, that there is going to be no costless solution. And those trade-offs will have to be accepted, and you have to pull the trigger in terms of decision making. That is why it's often said, it is always lonely at the top. And more importantly, exercising delayed gratification. Right now, everybody in India is in a hurry to declare ourselves the world's leading economy. But many a time, we have to first be prepared to do the actions today without any idea when the effects will show through. And that is what is meant by accepting delayed gratification and the benefits. That requires discipline to hunker down, put your heads together, and not raise your head quickly, but do the hard work, do the yards, and rewards will be reaped later. Only those who are able to accept and practice delayed gratification become successful managers and leaders. And exercising leadership is a choice. And it is not just meant for the prime ministers and presidents and corporate CEOs. In every situation, you can be a leader and incorporate these attributes in your behavior. A book that I read when I was in my high school, a fiction in Tamil. The author wrote something which has stuck to my head. Even in a funeral procession, the four men who carry a dead body to its cremation ground, one of them would like to think of himself as a leader. So all of us are in situations where you are a group leader, or you are a class leader, you are a particular society's leader. And therefore, in those situations, you have to be able to inspire your fellow society members, your group, and group situations will require trade-offs. And you may have to exercise delayed gratification. The next group leader or society leader will probably reap the benefits of the actions you took. So which goal are you maximizing? Your personal goals or the larger group interest goals? These are the conflicts that one has to face up to. So to go from being a manager to public policy, you must understand that there are important differences and there are important commonalities as well. And I hope I have given you some glimpses of the various complexities involved that policymakers in a country like India, where each state is equivalent to one big country in the world, what we are doing today to grow from where we were in 1993, a $300 billion economy, to where we are today, $3.4 trillion economy, and looking ahead to become a $7 trillion economy by 2030, and even further towards 30 trillion by 2047. And that journey is being made by India as the world keeps changing. The last 40 years were relatively easier. We are going to find the next 30 years a lot difficult in geopolitics, with climate change, with the agenda of the developed world. But we are today a society that is aspirational. But remember, aspiration is different, ambition is different. Aspiration understands the work that needs to be done. Ambition simply wants to get there. So we need to be an aspirational society, not an ambitious society. And that requires accepting complexity, accepting the role of chance and luck, and also learning that we can never get rid of our biases, and therefore we need to be humble about our successes and failures. I hope I have left you with something to ponder over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nageshwaran, for sharing your valuable insights. Now, as we move forward, we have an exciting opportunity for an interactive session with our esteemed guests. So please feel free to ask your questions. I request our CPPR team members to please pass on the mics to those who want to ask questions.
Thank you, Dr. Nageshwaran, for the very interesting talk. One aspect where India has made progress is in payment, Paytm, GPay, and things like that. Cashless economy. But the flip side of cashless economy is, has the government considered indebtedness, that you're less disciplined about spending? I mean, and especially in the lower, you have your whole bank account with you in Paytm or GPay, and the indebtedness that it might lead, especially in the lower sections of society.
So what was the question, please?
The increased indebtedness from lower sections of society because of cashless transactions, access to Paytm and GPay.
Is that a question or is that a statement?
No, a statement. Has it been considered, this aspect, by the government, whether it is leading to increased indebtedness?
I think the Reserve Bank of India has increased the risk weights for unsecured consumer loans. And that is the reason, and that is proof enough that policymakers, whether it is central bank or the Ministry of Finance, that have taken into consideration that whenever there is a new innovation, there will naturally be a tendency to overshoot. And therefore, guardrails have to be put in place. And that is the reason why the Reserve Bank of India last month announced additional risk weights that banks have to meet, which means they have to hold much more capital with respect to unsecured personal loans. So there is awareness of the problem, and there has been a proactiveness in tackling it before it becomes even bigger.
Uh, Good afternoon, sir. Sir, I wanted to start with an anecdote before I were asking a question. So, if I may have your permission, I would like to share that anecdote first.
Sure.
So, as a student of both economics and management, I have worked on a paper wherein I've basically saw referred to a trifecta of concepts. The first being the environmental Kuznets curve, the second being the pollution haven hypothesis, and the third being fixed effects regression. So, in support of what you said in the initial few moments of your presentation, the West has actually propagated this myth that climate change is mostly a burden on developing economies. But according to what I have researched and what I've come across in my empirical research as well, is that it is only after the economy becomes a developed one that people actually start caring about the environmental regulations and norms. And the pollution haven hypothesis also is something similar. So I want to ask that how, as a student, we can counter these narratives which are being spread, which may be not in the best interest of our country. Thank you.
No, I mean, as students, you need to be well informed first, and that is what you seem to be doing. And ultimately, one has to be well informed, understand the other side, understand their motivations. For example, why is Europe pushing carbon border adjustment tax or CBAM? CBAM, on the face of it, may appear as if they are trying to simply reduce the amount of carbon in the world, but it is effectively, it could be an economic competitiveness issue, or it could be that they want us to focus on emissions rather than focusing on growth. So we need to understand their motivations. We need to speak in their idiom, and we need to always frame the debate in a manner that leaves the door open for them to actually understand that what they are proposing is not in their own self-interest. It's not easy, because even in those countries, there are multiple players and stakeholders who have different goals. So just as I say, in any government, there are multiple sovereigns, any country in the world. And that applies to very much to this entire field of climate change and global warming. And you have to actually also locate experts with credibility from inside Western nations who understand the perspectives and the priorities that we need to adopt, and use them to make your arguments, because that will make it relatively more difficult. For example, John Pisani-Ferry of the Bruegel Institute, who's very much attached to the French government, is making the arguments in terms of macroeconomic consequences of emission mitigation. Some of his papers and writings will be very useful to us. Similarly, a Lancet study, which was very widely used, Lancet as a journal was very widely used during COVID for people to advance their own vested interests. But the same Lancet is now publishing the study that shows that coal-related deaths will come down dramatically. Use those kinds of research. And there is an economist called Richard Toll in the University of Essex in the US, in the UK, my apologies, And he has done a lot of work on the costs and benefits of the Paris Agreement implementation. So we need to read widely. We need to deploy experts from within the West who are a little more balanced, who understand the real trade-offs involved. And we need to make the arguments in a manner that leaves the door open for them to embrace your argument as if they own it. If it's seen as imposed, there will be resentment and resistance, which is exactly how we are reacting now. It is seen as being imposed by the West, so we are naturally reacting. And we have to make the argument that economic growth and climate change are not necessarily antithetical to one another. This is not easy. This requires less of emotion and more of calm data gathering, which is what I mentioned in my slides as well. Become empirical, wherever possible, accumulate data. So it is a painstaking process. And therefore, and given the balance of power in the world today, which still is wielded by nations of the West, given that they dominate the institutions that influence the world, like the UN, the World Bank, the WTO, the IMF, etc., it is an uphill battle. Recognize that and accept that. And be patient, be persevering. So all these attributes are needed to succeed. We may still not succeed, but that's a different story. But these are necessary conditions.
Thank you, sir. Do we have next question? Yes.
Yeah, hello, sir. The economic survey of 2024 document that you will author would be presented in less than a month's time. One of your predecessor, Dr. Subramaniam, in the economic survey of 2016-17, argued or advocated about the idea of universal basic income. After debate, the idea didn't materialize or went into a limbo. One of the criticism that was given was the current status of resources in the country will necessitate a trade-off between universality or basic part of the UBI. But as now we are talking about country moving towards $5 trillion economy, and as the size of economic pie will grow for sure in future, do you believe that in future the idea of UBI will materialize in the country?
I have no idea. I can't speak for policy makers. I'm only an advisor. And the word universal is something that we need to keep in mind. It cannot be universal. People in upper middle income and upper income categories need not have to get it. And as I mentioned in the course of my several remarks, we need to be aware of the law of unintended consequences and that the road to hell can be paved with good intentions.
Thank you, sir. We have one more question.
Hi, good afternoon, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah.
All right. So, sir, I just wanted to discuss one thing. Since very recently in the last term, we were taught about the importance of budgetary controls. And since the budget session is also coming up, what are the major economic implications that are taken into consideration or major economic problems that are maybe looked at when we're talking about a new budget?
First of all, the budget to be presented on February 1st is, as the Honorable Finance Minister has said, it is an interim budget. It's a vote on account, which means while estimates will be presented for the full financial year 24-25, the government will take approval only for the first few months, next 4 months, just to keep the system running. So the policy priorities of the government will get reflected after the elections, whichever government is in office, and that will be the full budget. Now, what do budgets take into consideration? We have known that budgets in general in this country have not been simply financial statements, but also are a policy document because several other policy priorities of the government are enunciated. And given where we are today, I mean, we need to ensure that we have skilling of the youth that needs to be addressed. We need to provide for energy transition. We need to continue to invest in infrastructure. And we need to take care of the bottom of the pyramid, apart from continuing to provide for capital expenditure, while at the same time keeping one eye on the fiscal deficit and credit rating, because ultimately the most important fiscal stimulus a government can give to the entire country, which applies to everybody, is a lower cost of capital. And that can come from a credit rating. And recently we published a collection of essays from the office of the CEA, and it's available on the internet. You can download it and read those essays. And therefore, the priorities of the government that get reflected in the budget, apart from quantitative parameters like the fiscal deficit and the public debt ratio, etc., the deficit ratio, the debt ratio, etc., but it also has to reflect, take into consideration both development needs as well as equity needs of the country.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any more questions? Sir, there is one more question, sir.
Sure.
Due to paucity of time, we'll be taking this last question, then we'll be moving on.
Good afternoon, sir. Am I
Yeah.
audible? So, sir, you have been in the business of making recommendations for your entire career, and we as managers are also going to be in that business only. So, when you make a recommendation, you totally believe it. You are in your heart, you think this is the right decision. What do you do when it's not accepted?
No, I think it's a very interesting question and probably requires a longer time to answer this. In general, one should not be under the impression that what one is recommending is the final word or the only word that is possible. And it is good to have this attitude that that Lord Krishna has propounded in Bhagavad Gita, which is that you are doing your duty, which is to make the recommendation. The decision maker has his or her own other set of considerations that they have to keep in mind, and you may not be aware of them. And second, there is no guarantee that your decision will turn out to have been the correct one, because how the world is going to evolve is not in your control either. So you have as good a chance of being wrong as you have a chance of being right. So humility applies to the person who makes the recommendations as it does to the actual decision maker or the leader. And you may also want to go back to the drawing board and look at why your recommendations was not accepted. Was it in the recommendation content or was it in the manner of delivery? So all these things, and ultimately, as long as you don't confuse your personal ego with the recommendation, you don't have to take it as a personal failure and you can move on. And sometimes ideas will have to wait for the right context and the time to arrive before it gets accepted. Professor Jagdish Bhagwati, when he came to Singapore in 2012 or 13, made a very interesting statement that some of the recommendations that my wife Padma Desai and I made in the 1960s were implemented in 1991 when economic liberalization in India happened. So sometimes ideas have to wait for that time to come.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, there was we have one more question someone wanted to ask the last time.
Okay.
We're taking one last, sir, if you may.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Hello, good afternoon, sir. So my question is, how do you anticipate the latest expansion of BRICS will affect the Indian economy?
It's a good question. It is very difficult to anticipate. It may have only a marginal effect. It may not have a big effect. And it is very difficult to model these things. Therefore, I can't anticipate. I can only wait and see how it will play out and whether BRICS in general have had an impact on Indian economy in the past in general. If that is the case, then why should an expanded BRIC have an impact than what the original BRICS had? So it is very difficult to come up with an answer to your question, except that one has to be aware and watch the developments. It may be the impact is more on geopolitics, or even there it could be very limited because these configurations keep changing all the time. You have the Quad, you have the BRICS, you have the G20. Which one is more important? Which one will have a greater influence? Difficult to say.
Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate the active participation from our audience. Thank you very much. Now, thank you, Dr. Nageshwaran.
I wish you all the very best, all of you. Good health, happiness, success. More importantly, a sense of purpose, a larger purpose in your pursuits in 2024 and beyond. All the best.
Thank you, sir. Sir, thank you
I
for
saw that.
illuminating responses. As we approach, sir, may I request our Dean Academics, Dr. Sanjay Patru, for a vote of thanks. Sir,
Okay.
Good afternoon, Sri Anantha Nageshwaran, for a illuminating talk this afternoon. Post lunch, that too on a Saturday, when many of the students were not so sure about what public policy has to do in a management course, they came in large numbers, and you have not disappointed them. You started with the paradoxes that a nation, that a manager, that a person faces in day to day, and you made that very clear with the three questions that you posed. And you spoke about the the differences between a manager and a leader, and and what one has to do to move to that level. Your suggestions of being experimentative, open to failure, and being having the attribute of humility. I think that came out thrice during your talk. Coming from IIM Ahmedabad, a top B school, you could relate to the issues that our management students would be having in their mind. Instead of pure data, economic data, you related to them about the issues they would be confronting as they move forward. We couldn't have you in person here. I, on behalf of our director and the institute, would love to invite you to be here in person sometime, maybe after the budget, when time permits. Thank you so much.
It will be my pleasure to visit the campus and be there in person, interact with students, both formally and informally. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
thank you, sir. And a very big thank you to our guest, Dr. Anantha Nageshwaran, for gracing us with your presence and sharing your expertise. We are truly privileged to have had this opportunity. I extend sincere thanks to all our guests, faculty, and students for being part of this enriching event. Your presence has made this occasion truly special, and we look forward for more such insightful sessions in the future. Thank you very much. And now we conclude today's session. Thank you.